Welcome to Department of Distance and Continuing Education, University of Delhi. Master of Business Administration, MBA. Semester 1, Core Course, MBA 6107, Business Communication. Unit 4, Cross Cultural Communication. 4.1, Learning Objectives. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to define culture and explain the evolution of culture. Enumerate the different approaches to study cultures. Define cross-cultural communication and appreciate its importance in the present context. Enumerate the different mediums through which communication occurs across cultures. Enunciate business etiquettes observed in different cultures. Formulate strategies for successfully communicating across cultures using the theoretical framework provided in this lesson. 4.2 Introduction. Have you noticed that the world around us is getting more diverse and our interactions with people from different cultures are growing at a rate faster than ever? The interaction among people from different cultures has been on the rise due to industrialization, migration from rural to urban areas, and improvement in technology, modes of transportation, and communication. Foreign trade is taking place at unprecedented levels, and more people are traveling to get their business done. Corporations are enthusiastic about having a culturally diverse workforce and flaunt it in their presentations and annual reports. Communication with people from different cultures within the country or different nationalities can be a greater challenge than you imagine. Your chances of success in business will be determined by how well you are able to overcome this challenge. Cultural differences can be tangible and intangible. Food, art, costumes, etc. constitute the tangible or visible aspect of cultural differences. However, it is only a minor aspect when compared to the intangible aspect which basically stems from differences in core values across cultures. Therefore, it is upon the intangible aspect of cultural differences that we will be dwelling upon in this lesson. 4.3 What is culture? Culture refers to the collective way of thinking and going about life. It evolves as a consequence of the complex phenomenon of continuous communication between people. As they go along, the people adopt certain ideas, values, beliefs, principles, rituals, and customs that are passed on from one generation to the next. This definition implies that culture is a collective asset and is shared by each individual who happens to be a part of it. Those from the same culture often feel an affinity for each other, especially when interacting in a heterogeneous environment. A culture often involves within a geographical region. Members make conscious efforts to preserve it, which means that culture becomes a unifying factor for its members. Every culture has certain unique attitudes which greatly influence the communication patterns of its members. Culture has a deep impact on the style of communication. However, people frequently oversimplify it and create stereotypes, which is a barrier to effective communication. 4.3.1 Where can you start? Acknowledge. The first step towards learning to communicate better in a cross-cultural business environment is to acknowledge that there are differences in culture and that there is nothing good or bad about it. The next step is to shed all preconceived notions about a culture and start afresh. Be curious. If you want to make a genuine attempt at communicating better with people of different cultures, get curious like a child and start reading. 4.4 Studying cultures. The two key approaches to studying cultures are detailed below. 4.4.1 Structural approach. Examining culture using the structural method entails studying its constitution and forms. The structural approach is based on identifying the differences in cultures of various nation states, geographical regions, not confined by national boundaries, faiths, ethnicities, etc., based on differences in values, beliefs, customs, attitudes, expectations, and goals. For example, There are stark differences in the Western and Oriental cultures. The culture of British people is distinct from that of the other mainland European nations, which in turn have distinct cultures of their own. The structured approach is the traditional way of studying cultures and offers great insights in developing an understanding of how to communicate to be successful in our day to day interactions with people from different cultures. 4.4.2 Transaction Approach. This approach views a culture being created as a result of the communication or the multifarious interactions between people. In other words, culture emerges and evolves as people go about transacting their thoughts and responses. The everyday communication between people leads to creation of patterns which are distinguishable, and over a period of time these patterns get reinforced as the transactions continue to take place over and over again. The transaction view of culture recognizes the importance of going beyond nation states and geographical regions to broaden the scope by encompassing groups which display a certain distinctiveness in their behavior and the manner in which they communicate. From their communication, it is said that the culture is symbolically transacted. For instance, medical doctors, share brokers or traders, musicians, and online gamers all share a certain vocabulary and display common styles of communication, which is essentially an outcome of the daily transaction of their distinct businesses. Interestingly, studying and adopting the styles of communication can potentially help one in gaining acceptance or even membership of various cultural groups. Exercise 1. 1. Look back at your personal and social life and try to pen down the number of distinct cultures you've come across. 2. Based on the above, do you think cultures change strictly with nationality? 3. Try to remember the longest interaction you had with a person from a different culture. 4. Make an effort to isolate the key points of difference between your culture and the other person. 4.5 Cross-cultural communication. The interaction between people of different cultures, whether between those from different geographical regions, nation states, religions, etc., is called cross-cultural communication or intercultural communication. The process of exchanging messages between people of different cultures can potentially lead them to interpret the verbal and non-verbal signs differently. Cross-cultural communication involves the study of culture mostly from the structural perspective to identify the differences from one's own culture to develop strategies to align with the target to improve understanding and the probability of a successful engagement. Cross-cultural communication deals with how people from varied cultural milieus interact and the challenges they face in the process. These challenges are not confined to differences in languages or dialects but extend much beyond to differences in non-verbal signals, perceptions, metaphors, and so on. The biggest hindering factor when it comes to cross-cultural communication is perception and preconceived notions. You really don't know what to expect from the other person because you are not aware of the values and accepted behaviors in his or her culture. Due to this unawareness, perception and stereotypes dominate your thoughts, thereby potentially ruining the chances of success. Another factor that acts as an impediment in cross-cultural communication is ethnocentric bias or ethnocentrism. Ethnocentric bias compels people to see and judge other cultures under the influence of one's own culture. Here is an illustration of ethnocentric bias. An American and a Chinese were visiting a cemetery where their friend had been buried. The American was carrying a beautiful bunch of flowers to put on his friend's grave. The Chinese was carrying a bowl of cooked rice and some fruits. The American found it ridiculous that one would leave food at a grave. "Do you really think," asked the American, barely hiding his contempt, "that your dead friend will come and eat the food you leave at the grave?" "Yes, of course," retorted the startled Chinese after a moment's pause. "My friend will come and eat the food around the same time your friend comes out to smell the flowers you are leaving for him." It was a friendly dig at each other's culture. It grew from the difficulty the American had in understanding the logic of a Chinese custom. Fortunately for the two, the cultural differences did not threaten their friendship. However, one's culture can be a major block, especially in international communication. For the purpose of this lesson, we will delve deeper into the structural construct of culture to be able to develop strategies for successfully communicating in a cross cultural environment. 4.5.1 Understanding cross cultural communication through structure view of cultures. The structure based approach leads us to classify cross cultural characteristics into the following divisions: A. Context, B. Individual or collective, C. Time, D. Conflict. Context. Context refers to the setting, environment, relationship, etc., in which the communication is taking place. The extent to which this communication relies on being explicit or implicit varies from culture to culture. The portion that is left unsaid is decoded based on the situation and the relationship between the parties in communication. Based on the degree of what is left unsaid, cultures are classified as high context and low context. High context. Cultures that attach high importance to circumstances, setting, environment, and are not very explicit in verbal terms are called high context cultures. Such cultures tend to be ceremonial and protocols exist for conduct in meetings and gatherings. In South Africa, great importance is given to a person's tribal lineage when comprehending a conversation. Its culture considers it fair to assign higher priority to friends, family, and close associates even in business transactions. Therefore, what may seem unethical in, say, American culture is regarded as ethical in South African culture. Low context. On the other hand, in low context cultures, the message itself does most of the communication and the context and background are of no or very little consequence. In such cultures, success would depend greatly on how well prepared and logical your argument is and how well it is presented. The relationships in such cultures are consciously removed to make an unbiased decision, which is why it is common for people to step aside from making decisions involving family and friends. In fact, such clauses are usually built into contracts that make it an obligation for the contracting parties to declare any related individuals in the business under negotiation. Collectivist, individualist. There are collectivist cultures and individualist cultures based on whether importance is given to individual identity or collective identity. It is common knowledge that Eastern societies tend to be more collectivist, whereas Western societies are individualist. Collectivist. Societies in the East have been collectivist and assign enormous importance to groups. Decision making is a consensus making exercise in such societies. In the villages of India, the institution of Panchayat is a perfect example of how the interest of communities assign paramount importance and individual interests are often sacrificed for the larger good of the community. In collectivist societies, focused pursuit on personal goals only would be considered selfish. It is quite common for the elders to intervene in such a situation to bring the individual back on the right track. In collectivist cultures, much care is taken not to hurt the sentiment of the community. Therefore, criticism is often very oblique, especially when it is about seniors or elders. Individualist. The societies that regard personal pursuits to be more important than collective pursuits are called individualist cultures. Western societies are classified as individualist, and the aspirations of the individual combined with the liberty to make the decisions for him or herself are regarded as fundamental to their existence. Individual achievement is celebrated in such societies. The most remarkable of such societies is the American society, which is quintessentially individualist. In individualist cultures, such as American, relationships are not diffused but specific. It essentially means that a boss will just be a boss and would not be perceived as, say, an elder brother, the way sometimes it is in India. This gives them the leeway to be direct in their criticism. The degree of straightforwardness or bluntness would vary in Western cultures. For instance, Americans are quite blunt, whereas the British would understate. Time. The views of different cultures on time is one of the most frequently quoted characteristics of cultures. It is also perhaps one of the most common factors that acts as a potential deal maker or deal breaker in a cross cultural business environment. How many times have you heard the word cliche? Time is money. It precisely characterizes the perception of time prevalent in the Western culture, such as the United States and the United Kingdom. Therefore, adhering to timelines goes a long way in creating a favorable impression that lays the foundation for business to take off. Cultures can be classified into the following two types based on their views on time. Monochronism. Monochronic cultures take a linear view of time and essentially means that full attention is focused on one thing and multitasking is avoided. People from such cultures strictly observe and respect timelines. They do not appreciate people reaching late for meetings and digressing too much from the matter under deliberation or discussion. In such cultures, time is an asset of great value and, therefore, there is little room for being flexible. Polychronism. Polychronism is characterized by a flexible view as regards time and assigns greater importance to relationships and multitasking. The objective is to get the job done rather than to complete the job within a strict schedule. Examples of polychronic cultures include South American and Arab cultures. Polychronism is also characterized by members attempting unrelated tasks simultaneously and switching frequently between tasks. The insistence of people from monochronic cultures to adhere to timeline may be perceived in polychronic as being too pushy and rude. Table 4.1 Comparison of monochronic and polychronic characteristics. Monochronic culture. Focus on one thing at a time. Polychronic culture. Focus on multiple tasks at a time. Monochronic culture builds schedules and timelines. Polychronic culture. Importance on completion of tasks than adhering to deadlines. Monochronic culture. Low context. Polychronic culture. High context. Monochronic culture. Time is important. Polychronic culture. Relationship building is important. Monochronic culture. Task orientation. Polychronic culture. People orientation. An interesting scale was developed by R. D. Lewis that rates Eastern and Western countries on what is termed as a linear active and multi-active scale. As the name suggests, linear active people focus on one thing at a time and are not too flexible. Multi-active, on the other hand, are known to multitask and do not bother too much about time. Most linear active cultures, as per Lewis, were German, Swiss, American, Canadian, and British, whereas the most multi-active cultures were Indian, Latin American, Arab, Pakistani, and Spanish. Here's a case study. A lost opportunity. Lindsay is a mid-level manager from a UK-based exhibition company that wishes to organize a trade expo in New Delhi. She seeks appointment with the manager in charge of a leading venue complex in the National Capital Region, NCR, and visits his office at the scheduled time. To her surprise, Lindsay finds that the venue manager is in another meeting at the time that was allotted to her. She waits for about 30 minutes, after which the venue manager arrives in his office. They start the meeting and Lindsay is perturbed to see that the venue manager keeps engaging in brief conversations with his subordinates on matters unrelated to the ongoing meeting with Lindsay. He also attends to walk-in guests and responds to phone calls during the entire meeting. Lindsay had this unpleasant experience due to the unawareness of the venue manager about the cultural sensitivities of his potential client. The venue ended up losing the event to a smaller competitor in the city. Conflict. Different cultures deal with conflicts differently. An understanding of the various attitudes towards conflicts can assist in managing conflicts in a better way. As per Martin and Nakayama, 2007, based on the writings of Augsburg, 1992, there exist two different culture views to conflicts, namely, conflict as opportunity and conflict as destructive. It has been observed that individualist societies see conflicts as opportunities, whereas collectivist societies view conflicts as destructive. Opportunity approach to conflicts. The cultures that view conflicts as opportunities regard conflicts as normal and a potentially useful process. Attempts are made to resolve the conflict through negotiation with the underlying assumption that matters may change if confronted and negotiated. Destructive approach to conflicts. Conflicts are regarded in some cultures as aberrations that need to be addressed by disciplining those responsible for the conflict. Such cultures see conflicts as unnatural, futile, and harmful for the general harmony and greater good of the community. Conflict management. There are five distinct conflict management styles identified by Rahim in 1983. First, avoiding. Second, obliging. Third, compromising. Fourth, integrating. Fifth, dominating. Avoiding. This style of conflict management entails withdrawing from a conflict situation. Obliging. It involves giving in to the demands of the other party to end the conflict situation. Compromising. To arrive at a solution, both parties take a step back or forward, due to which neither feels fully satisfied. Integrating. It entails active negotiations by all parties involved to understand each other's positions and deliberate on alternative or available options. The idea is to arrive at a solution that is acceptable to all. Dominating. It is merely coercing of one party by the other who may be in an advantageous position. It may have negative consequences in the long run. Exercise 2. 1. What is your view on time? 2. Would you classify yourself as monochronic or polychronic? 3. Find out using the table above that classifies the characteristics of monochronic and polychronic cultures. 4. Do this exercise with your friends from different cultures and compare the results. If you don't have friends from other cultures, forget this exercise and get some. 4.6. Communication across cultures through different mediums. The most widely accepted mediums or channels in the context of cross-cultural communication are A. Listening, B. Verbal, C. Non-verbal, D. Written. Out of these different modes of communication, the verbal, face-to-face version is the oldest and the most common. 4.6.1. Active listening. Listening is one skill in communication that is usually underappreciated and overlooked. Active listening warrants a person to be attentive to what the speaker is saying and to align himself with the speaker to constantly validate and maximize the understanding. In cross-cultural communication, listening becomes all the more important as a genuine effort at paying attention helps in building trust and rapport. However, in every culture, there are appropriate behaviors for listening that helps in building trust and gaining acceptance. How to be a good listener? Prepare yourself. If you want to be a good, active listener, you should do some homework and learn about the people that you are going to meet. Better preparedness will give you an edge over people who simply walk in. Make an attempt to ascertain if the person you are communicating with comes from a high context or a low context culture. Pay attention. If the speaker notices that you are not being attentive or showing signs of losing interest, the communication will suffer and so will the business underway. If the speaker says something that you find rude, do not take offense. and try to reconfirm if the non-verbal signals corroborate the spoken word. 4.6.2 Verbal Medium. Verbal communication is perhaps the most commonly used medium in a cross-cultural environment. It comprises of spoken or oral communication and the written mode. The verbal medium relies on language, dialects, tone and tenor, loudness, level of education, and so on. The spoken word. Spoken communication can happen face to face or through telephone, computer, and mobile phone applications that are on the internet, radio, television, and so on. In high context cultures such as Chinese, oral communication is decoded and understood in the context of non-verbal signals manifested by the communicator. For this reason, if the non-verbal cues are not consistent with the verbally coded message, the receiver may go with what the non-verbal signals suggest. Therefore, the importance of non-verbal medium can hardly be exaggerated, especially in the high context cultures. On the other extreme of the cultural spectrum, that is American, a low context culture, the explicit verbal message is considered almost final for the purpose of interpretation. It must be evident by now that two people from cultures far apart on the cultural spectrum will do best by studying and understanding each other's cultural nuances to have a successful engagement. Even within the Western culture, there are differences that warrant closer study to be able to navigate successfully in a global business environment. For example, the British are accustomed to being rather formal and polite in asking for things in contrast with, say, the Germans, who are quite straightforward. The British enthusiastically follow courtesies and words and phrases such as please, sorry, thank you, beg your pardon, etc. are used very frequently. Here is an image showing the British way of asking for help. Written communication. The written mode of communication is considered relatively easier than the oral mode, as the sender has more time at his disposal to strategize and encode the message. However, the flip side is that one does not get instant feedback as in verbal communication that helps you modulate and fine-tune your strategy during the conversation. In a global business environment, the written mode is the most commonly used method of communication and hence becomes the most important to be mastered. The written word stays forever as it may be preserved as a record. It is reason enough for one to be extremely aware and thoughtful when communicating through the written medium. The written medium includes letters, emails, memorandums, reports, contracts, proposals, etc. How to write effectively in a cross-cultural context. To write effectively and be impactful and clear to your reader, the first step is to be aware of your own culture. An awareness of one's own cultural characteristics and biases will help in neutralizing the influence it would have on your communication with people from other cultures. Once you clearly have your own culture in mind, you can compare it with the culture of your target to have a strategy in place to write in a tone and tenor neutral of ethnocentric biases. The tone and tenor of the written communication should be consistent with what the target would be expecting based on whether the latter's culture is skewed towards low context or high context. Therefore, a mix of theoretical and hands-on approach derived from one's own experiences or from that of your seniors or mentors should be employed when writing to people of different cultures. Extent of detail. People from low context cultures such as Germany and United States prefer detailing at minute levels because whatever is explicit is more important for them. Contrast this with high context cultures like Japanese, where the writer would expect the reader to have the basic understanding of the subject matter and therefore will be less than explicit. You should have this at the back of your mind to avoid the reader from taking offense at being provided excess or less information. However, this does not hold true for the decision making process in the US and Japan. Corporations in the US tend to be quicker in decision making as the powers are sufficiently delegated as individual contribution is important to the Americans, whereas in Japan, the decision making is a consensus building process and may take somewhat longer. You must select your words carefully and arrange the text in a logical, organized fashion after building in sufficient context. Articulation is of much more importance in written communication than eloquence. One should avoid using slangs, idioms, and proverbs when writing to a counterpart or a colleague who is from a different cultural milieu, as it can obscure the understanding of the latter. Roundabout and ornate language is also best avoided in the written medium. Use universally recognized conventions rather than the ones in vogue only in a particular region or culture. For instance, the format of dates can cause confusions as shown below. As you can see in the table 4.2, the British and American conventions of dates differ, which can cause confusion between the month and date. Therefore, it is best to use the neutral convention, which is quite explicit. Decoding the written communication received by you from somebody from a different culture is also an art. Imagine that you had sent a request asking for something from your business associate in Japan, and if the latter wants to decline it, there are high chances that you will not get a direct no. The Japanese tend to avoid using no as an answer as it is considered rude, so they would try to write obliquely, hoping that the other party would get the message. 4.6.3 Non-verbal medium. Speaking sans words. Non-verbal communication involves communicating without the use of spoken words and instead using facial expressions, hand or body gestures, posture, and physical distance. It also refers to the communication that happens at subconscious level while the oral communication is underway. The most interesting thing about non-verbal communication is that it can send out signals that are inconsistent with what is being said, thereby leading an intelligent listener to discover the contradiction. There are certain emotions that are universal and culture neutral, such as happiness, sadness, fear, anger, etc., which are expressed by means of non-verbal communication in similar ways throughout the world. However, there are accepted cultural norms for how emotions are expressed in front of others. For example, in Arab culture, it is quite acceptable to mourn out loud to express grief, whereas in China or Japan, expressing feelings of great happiness or grief openly is considered unacceptable. It is quite acceptable for friends to embrace in some cultures, whereas it is considered inappropriate in others. Even the distance maintained by people during a conversation can have a profound impact on the communication, as we shall learn later in the lesson. Here's a case study. Cultural shock. A recent Indian migrant to the United States who was used to pulling cheeks of even unacquainted kids back in India was shocked when a young American kid snapped back aggressively saying, "You don't want to mess with me," on getting his cheek grazed by the Indian man with his hand. It is because the expression of affection through non-verbal medium varies across cultures. Gestures or kinesics. Movements of the body made in particular ways carry meanings that are manifest and clear only to those initiated into that culture. Most common gestures include the thumbs up, thumbs down, the OK sign, the beckoning sign, etc. Table 4.3 shows some common gestures and their meanings across cultures. The thumbs up or thumbs down gesture are used to convey approval or disapproval respectively in the US, whereas in some Arab cultures it is a highly offensive gesture equivalent to the middle finger in the US. In India, this gesture is used with the right hand to disappoint and taunt somebody. Next, this is perhaps the most recognizable hand gesture. It means OK or approval of something in the US. However, it is an obscene gesture in Brazil and an insulting gesture in Turkey and some Arab cultures. Next, this gesture is also known as the beckoning sign and can be made using just the index finger or a curled palm. It is the common gesture used for beckoning. However, in some Asian cultures such as Japan and Philippines, it is an insulting gesture considered fit only for beckoning animals. This gesture is called the motuza. It is used by spreading out all fingers of a hand and showing it close to the face of a person. It is an insult gesture traditionally used by the Greek. You will see the use of this gesture in demonstrations and protests in Greece. In India, especially in the northern states, this gesture is used when cursing somebody. Postures. Postures convey emotions and intentions and can be classified into open and closed postures. Adopting certain positive postures will help you to make an impact on the people you communicate with during the course of your professional and personal life. The basic postures are standing, sitting, squatting, and lying down. Out of these, the most relevant for cross-cultural business communication are standing and sitting postures. In the Western cultures, putting one's hands just above the hips in a standing position is considered as an attempt to dominate and be assertive. Open and closed postures. The open posture suggests friendliness or receptivity. It can be identified by a person with his legs apart in a relaxed position with open arms facing outward. In the American culture, people adopting an open posture are perceived to be more convincing than those who adopt a closed posture. A closed posture involves folding your arms across your chest, crossing your legs in the standing or sitting position, etc. Proximity and personal space, or proxemics. The physical distance maintained by people communicating with each other is also a function of the cultural background. The appropriate distance to be maintained in each culture largely depends on the relation between the people in communication. In the Western cultures, the personal distance is classified into intimate, personal, social, and public. Intimate distance is close contact that is reserved for a person with whom you share a very close relationship. Personal distance around 1 to 1.2 meters apart is the space between two people shaking hands and is considered most appropriate for face-to-face communication. Social distance is the distance between people who are in a social gathering or in a business environment, for instance, people working in an office. Public distance is maintained between speakers and the audience in a public event, teachers and students in a lecture hall, etc. For the Americans, the comfortable distance for conversation is about arm's length to around 3 to 4 feet. Any intrusion into this space will be perceived as either intimacy or aggressiveness, whereas Arabs stand closer to each other than the Americans and perceive it as a sign of warmth. Paralinguistics. Paralinguistics refers to the non-verbal cues that are sent out through intonation and modulation of voice, pauses, rate of speech, etc. In fact, the famous English sarcasm is also a paralinguistic medium of communication. Oculesics. It is the study of communication through the eyes, for example, eye contact, blinking of eyelids, gazing, etc. If you make eye contact and keep nodding while listening to somebody from the US, it would be appreciated. Whereas, if steady eye contact is maintained while listening to a Japanese person, it will be construed as inappropriate and even rude. The Japanese also perceive nodding as merely listening as opposed to valuing what is being said. They also place great importance on silence and taking pauses as they speak, for these behaviors connote earnestness and genuineness in the Japanese culture. Exercise 3. 1. Studying the idioms in a language can potentially assist in developing a better understanding of the non-verbal cues in the culture that is associated with that language. One such idiom has been suggested below. Keep at arm's length to avoid from getting close. Find out if there are more such idioms in English and other languages that you speak. 4.7 Business etiquette across cultures. A code of conduct in the society, professional setting, or a group in general with rules, protocols, courtesies, conventions, customs, proprieties, etc. is called etiquette. It is a part of culture and human behavior and has variations across different cultures. Table 4.4 explains how are etiquettes different from manners. Etiquette: the code of conduct that acts as a set of guidelines for positive and polite behaviors in the society. Manners: the way of behavior consistent with the expected behavior. Etiquette: set of rules of behaving in the society or in a group. Manners: it refers to the actions themselves. Business etiquette: a set of guidelines that helps people behave and interact in a business setting with the stakeholders, clients, vendors, etc. in a way that is professional and accepted by the fraternity and helps portray the right image. It is clear that business etiquette is a key social skill that is indispensable for success in the business world. Business etiquette is also a function of the culture under study. Therefore, in a cross-cultural setting, it is important for you to research about the culture of the people with whom business is to be transacted. Now, we will delve into the business etiquette followed in India and some of the major countries or cultures in the world. Table 4.5 explains business etiquette in India. Greeting: the common way of greeting people is by shaking hands, and it has overtaken the folded hands greeting almost completely, at least in businesses. The most appropriate way to greet women is to wait a moment to see if they move their hands forward for a handshake, else the folded hands gesture can be used. However, in most big cities it is common for women to shake hands while greeting someone. Eye contact: it is not considered appropriate in the Indian context to maintain eye contact with seniors, though it may be construed as being evasive and even dishonest in the other cultures. Exchange of cards: though exchanging cards is not as ceremonious as it is in some other cultures, cards are formally presented with the right hand, sometimes with the left hand under the elbow of the right, which connotes respect. Appointments: appointments can get cancelled even at the last minute. Therefore, it is best to give as much warning as to your travel schedule as possible and confirm your appointment before you leave your office or country. Time: Indians tend to be flexible with time, especially for social events or gatherings. However, the practice of punctuality may vary within India too, from the north and to the south and so on. Hierarchy: Indians follow hierarchies in social as well as professional relationships. This hierarchy is always there at the back of their minds. Those in positions of authority will not be seen doing manual work even if it is their own. This is more true of the public sector. Dress code: the business dress code is mostly smart yet comfortable clothing. The dress code varies based on hierarchy. Women tend to wear saris, tunics, and Western formal attire, which is getting more and more common. Meetings: meetings tend to start late and overrun the allotted time. A clear agenda may not be there, and the meetings will usually commence with unrelated casual banter. Table 4.6 explains business etiquette in the United States. Greeting: a firm and warm handshake with proper eye contact is offered while greeting. If you are meeting a delegation, make sure that you don't lose eye contact with the person with whom you are shaking hands. Eye contact: maintaining proper eye contact during a conversation is perceived as a sign of sincerity, genuineness, and confidence. Exchange of cards: if interacting with someone for the first time, it is not appropriate to start a conversation by exchanging business cards until the conversation turns business oriented. However, if it is a formal business meeting, the exchange of cards takes place before the start of the meeting so that those attending are familiar with each other's names and roles. Writing on the business cards is not considered inappropriate. In fact, it may be appreciated if you write your personal mobile phone number on the back of the card and hand it over. Appointments. People in America like to keep their appointments and there are hardly any cancellations except in the case of emergency. Time. US culture is monochronic and events are scheduled one at a time. They are particular about punctuality and adhering to schedules. Hierarchy. The culture in US corporates is less hierarchical because of their inherent belief in equality. Dress code. Business suits in navy blue or grey and tie with solid white shirts for formal meetings. Women wear dresses or suits in classic colors of grey, white, navy, etc. Personal space. The US, being a no touch culture, Americans are very particular about their personal space. In fact, there is concept of personal bubble within which no intrusion is tolerated. So, at least an arm's length distance is always maintained. Meetings. Meetings are taken seriously and have clear agendas. Side activity is not appreciated at all and may be perceived as disinterest. Table 4.7 explains business etiquette in England. Greeting. Handshake is the norm for men as well as women. Eye contact. Persistent eye contact should be avoided as it can make people uncomfortable. The best thing to do is to make eye contact every now and then. Exchange of cards. Card etiquette is quite relaxed in Britain. Business cards are considered as an easy way of handing out your contact details to a potential vendor or client. Appointments. Appointments are honored except in case of emergency or some genuine reasons. Time. Punctuality is important. Arriving a little early is acceptable. Hierarchy. British society had been traditionally class-based and hence hierarchy is taken seriously. Titles are very important. So, if a person has been knighted, he will expect himself to be addressed as Sir, followed by the first name. Dress code. For business meetings or engagements, formal conservative attire is the norm, which includes dark suits for men, though for women there aren't much restrictions as to color. Personal space. For English people, personal space is important and touching in public is considered inappropriate. Also, personal questions are to be strictly avoided as privacy is very dear to English people. Meetings. Meetings are pre-arranged by taking appointments. Documentation of the meetings, including circulation of agendas, minute taking, etc., are of importance. Table 4.8 explains business etiquette in the Arab world. Greeting. Handshakes are the norm, though they last longer than handshakes in the Western cultures. It is best to wait for your counterpart to withdraw his or her hand before you do. Men are recommended not to initiate a handshake with an Arab businesswoman unless she extends her hand. Eye contact. Eye contact is acceptable. Exchange of cards. Please ensure to get your business cards printed in Arabic and English, keeping in view that the former is written from right to left. Time. Most of the Arab world follows a different working week from the rest of the world. Weekends fall on Fridays and Saturdays, barring a few exceptions. Business hours are truncated during the month of Ramadan, so it is advisable to avoid business and meetings during this month. The concept of time is more relaxed in the Arab world, and it is common for people to be late for meetings. However, it is advisable for you to be on time as a visitor. Hierarchy. Arab societies are hierarchical and organizational functioning is mostly top-down with decision-making in the hands of the powerful few. Dress code. Dark-colored business suits for men. Avoid wearing shorts and t-shirts when traveling in the Arab world. Women are expected to dress conservatively and modestly in the Arab world. Personal space. Arabs stand closer to each other during conversations than Americans do. Touching is also observed between members of the same gender. In fact, Saudi men can be seen walking hand in hand in public without being judged as to their sexual orientation. Meetings. Meetings are not planned much in advance and need to be confirmed a few days beforehand. Meetings usually start with an initial round of small talk. Interruptions during meetings are common as the Arab culture is polychronic. Hospitality. You may be offered refreshments during a meeting. Please accept it graciously. There is a lot of socializing before the food is served. It is common for men and women to dine separately. When socializing, avoid talking about religion and politics, especially Israel, as it may be taken offensively. Other, as the month of Ramadan is for fasting and austerity for the Muslim people, it is advisable to eat and drink indoors and away from the public eye. That is, if you are in the Arab world during the holy month. Table 4.9 explains business etiquette in China. Greeting. Between people of the same gender, handshake and a nod at the time of meeting and departing is the norm. Between people of the opposite gender, a handshake or a nod is considered appropriate. Eye contact. Eye contact is acceptable and considered polite. Exchange of cards. Make sure that your card is printed in Chinese on one side. Present your business card with both the hands with the Chinese side up. Please see the card carefully before you place it and never write on a card that is presented to you. Time. Punctuality is valued, so arrive for meetings on time or a little early. Hierarchy. Chinese corporates are hierarchical and based on age and position, and each individual has a specific position and role in the organization. Dress code. Formal business suits are the best for meetings with the Chinese as it conveys respect. Personal space. Chinese are comfortable standing less than arm's length apart, though this distance increases with strangers. Touching is not observed unless with family. Meetings. Meetings are a formal affair with a ritualistic approach. The senior member of the host speaks first, introducing himself and his team, followed by the leader of the visiting party. The Chinese like the visiting party to know who is in command, and the latter should make that evident too during the meeting. 4.8 Strategizing for effective cross-cultural communication. Now that you are equipped with a sound understanding of the theory and practices in a cross-cultural communication, it is time to evolve a strategy to communicate effectively in a cross-cultural context. Given below are steps that will assist you in developing a strategy and fine-tuning it. Be receptive. Your receptiveness and openness will help you in exploring and dwelling on certain aspects of your own or the target's culture that may help you overcome certain biases. Improve your awareness. Awareness of the existence of vast or subtle differences in cultures is crucial to get on to the next step. Always prepare well. Read as extensively as possible and watch a movie based on that culture. The movie will help you understand the non-verbal communication styles and subtleties of the culture under study. Decide on the language. If you do not speak the language of your counterpart, hire the services of a competent interpreter. However, if you are fluent in the language, make sure that you brush up your skills based on the peculiarities of how it is spoken in your counterpart's region or country as a native speaker. Be careful with humor. You need to be extra cautious when it comes to using humor in a cross-cultural context, for it can go wrong badly. For instance, the English use self-depreciating humor combined with understated sarcasm, whereas for the Japanese, humor is a private thing as they want to avoid embarrassment for themselves or for the other party. 4.9 Summary. Culture refers to a set of ideas, beliefs, and customs based on which certain norms are evolved over a long period of time, which becomes a way of leading life for the members who are part of it. A culture typically traces its origins to a particular geographical region. There are two distinct approaches to studying a culture, namely structure-based and transaction-based. The former involves examining the constitution and forms of cultures, whereas the latter studies its evolution through the multifarious interactions between people. Cross-cultural communication is the process of individuals or groups from different cultural backgrounds interacting with each other, recognizing their similarities and differences for a successful engagement. The four characteristics of culture under the structure-based approach of studying culture are: context refers to the environment or setting. High context cultures attach high importance to circumstances or environment and less to verbal communication. Low context cultures. The message itself does most of the communication, and the context and background are of no consequence. Individual or collective based on whether importance is given to individual or collective identity. Time. Classified as monochronic and polychronic cultures. Monochronic, linear view of time, focus on one item and avoids multitasking. Polychronic, flexible view on time, greater importance to relationships and multitasking. Conflict, the individualist societies see conflicts as opportunities, whereas collectivist societies view conflicts as destructive. Styles of conflict management: avoiding, obliging, compromising, integrating, and dominating. The important mediums or channels in the context of cross cultural communication are: A. Listening, B. Verbal, C. Non-verbal, D. Written. Cross cultural business etiquette refers to observance of certain accepted rules, customs, and behaviors for mutual consideration of people interacting for an effective engagement. Thank you for listening.